Introduction. I have written this collection of short stories in remembrance of a simpler time in history. While those years were teeming with political conflict and distant wars on the global scale, my summer months spent away from city life were tranquil. A different atmosphere abounded, and while the rest of the world was immersed in chaos and unrest, rural farm life took on a magical, dreamlike ambience. I was awakened to a whole new world. It was not a fast-paced life surrounded by concrete and stone, but it was a world of hard work. Another world emerged from the reaches of the big city. It was the world where distant relatives resided, all those aunts, uncles, and many cousins, both close and distant on the family tree. Those were the working farms of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The places where growers labored to supply many of the products that lined the local grocery and supermarket shelves. As a city dweller, I had no idea where such items originated from, nor did I really care who toiled and labored to produce them. I was citified and ignorant, thoroughly dependent on that food that seemed to just magically appear on our dinner table. I had no concept of another existence, that there was a far different life to be lived somewhere out there beyond the city limits. But that limited city slicker perspective was about to change. My mother was a single parent and worked a demanding career as a nurse, laboring many long, hard hours to care for the sick. She found it very challenging to look after a 7-year-old while working, and it was very difficult to balance life and work and motherhood, especially when the summer months arrived. After all, for 3 months of the year, I was a free spirit, released from the chains of the classroom to explore the great mysteries of the back streets and alleys of inner-city Indianapolis. It was not until a few neighborhood acquaintances and I dismantled a neighbor lady's stone barbecue fireplace that the proverbial manure hit the proverbial fan. 2 other boys and a tomgirl in my age bracket decided that the fireplace resembled more of a make-believe military vehicle, a tank, and the hatchway needed some modifications for easier access. The project progressed smoothly, and once the opening accommodated our small frames, we were able to slide right down the chimney and out through the grill area. Of course, our fun came to a quick end when the owner returned home from work and found us all covered in soot from head to toe. Clearly, she envisioned her barbecue grill as more of a lawsuit than a tank. As we stood at attention and listened to her screams of Armageddon and doom for us, she failed to recognize that one of us was a girl and another was of color. The charcoal and soot made us all brothers in crime, so I couldn't really blame her confusion as she screamed, "You boys should be put in reform school." My confusion was her mention of reform school. How can they reform someone who's already a dreamer or a visionary? I wondered. We'd done a darn good job of reforming her fireplace, and she certainly didn't seem to appreciate it. After the cleansing of my life and a past judgment stating that I would never see a penny of my 50-cent allowance again, I was banished to the confines of house arrest until a further, more rational sentence could be issued. I never heard from my sooty accomplices again, and I often wondered if they'd been shipped off to that reform school. After a week of solitary confinement, I was approached by my mother, who handed a letter to me. That document, as legal as any a notary might have sealed, and a man in a black robe might have signed, explained my final punishment. I was to be sent away, after all, to serve my time on the working dairy farm that belonged to my aunt and uncle. I was mortified and shocked. I couldn't imagine being separated from my mother, shipped off to strangers who'd make me work for my meals. How barbaric. I seethed. At that point, reform school didn't seem so bad. At least there, they would have just changed my way of thinking. The fateful day arrived, and I was forced to pack my belongings into a small suitcase that was loaded into our old woody wagon. Still stunned, I took a final gaze at the neighborhood, comprised of tall homes and brick buildings that I would not see again for months. Or maybe never, if I get stomped by a deranged cow or horse. I worried. I was going to a place where people did not make up the majority, and I wasn't sure if the animals that ruled there would be too fond of a city boy like me. The closest I'd come to livestock in the city were a few pigeons and some stray dogs and alley cats, and I even kept my distance from them. Cows, pigs, chickens, and horses were going to be a whole different animal. As the station wagon pulled away from all I had ever known, I broke down in tears. I was being banished to a foreign land full of strange inhabitants, many of them four-legged. How will I ever cope with this? How will I survive? I'd never even met my uncle, but I knew he was a former drill sergeant for the U.S. Army, and now he barked his commands to dairy cows in the country. That's it. My life is over, I thought as I slid down into the seat of the station wagon and watched cornfields and woodlands replace the buildings of the city. The two-lane road was a roller coaster ride, and my stomach rose and fell with the climbing and descending of every hill along the country route. The trip was a monotonous, stomach-twisting, head-spinning 8 hours of twists and turns, ups and downs, and swerving around potholes, and we passed through several tiny speed trap, one-intersection towns along the way. The introduction of the modern highway now cuts the trip to 2 hours with no upset stomach. As the sun set in the western horizon, the station wagon strained to chug up the last big hill that would carry us to our destination, to my exile. When the door was opened, I stared out in disbelief at a big white house on the hilltop. From there, we had a panoramic 360-degree view of the entire valley. The evening fog settled into lowlands and hollows that offered foreboding places for evil spirits to hide. The aroma that assaulted my nostrils was something new, the stench of organic cow manure and dried hay, with a tinge of sweetness from freshly cut clover. I was reluctant to leave the safe and familiar harbor of the station wagon, so I was eventually dragged from my secure confines into the unknown. My first encounter with that strange environment was a misplaced step into some fresh cow droppings, and I instantly wanted to remove my lower foot with a hacksaw. The landscape was foreign, with a huge barn and many outbuildings. There was a tall, round tower looming above the tallest barn I'd ever seen. I would later learn that it was called a silo. Everywhere I looked, red beady eyes were gawking back at me, all gazing upon the city slicker who had the smell of concrete, asphalt, and steel lurking in his clothes. The four-legged critters seemed to be conversing with one another with their mooing and whinnying. The barnyard birds created a ruckus of cackles, clucks, and cock-a-doodle-doos. Clearly the topic of discussion among the inhabitants was who would dispatch the city dweller first. The sun was soon to disappear, and while twilight approached, a strange phenomenon appeared in the grassy plain that surrounded the large farmhouse. Lightning bugs flashed their greenish-yellow behinds by the thousands, shining through the misty night across the vast farm fields. That was my first encounter with off-the-grid beasties, but I hoped it would be a lasting one, if I even survived this place till morning, I thought. Seemingly, no sooner had I closed my eyes, I heard the thumping sound of heavy feet stomping up the stairway that led to the bedroom, sleeping quarters shared by many cousins, with 3 to 4 to a bed. "Wake up! It's time to rise and shine, girls!" bellowed the deep voice of my uncle. A quick scan out the window at the darkness told me it was some insanely early hour, 5 o'clock to be precise. I lumbered down the stairs and was overwhelmed by the smell of hot coffee on a pot-bellied stove and frying bacon that emitted a bluish haze in the kitchen. The kitchen was a buzz of activity, as my aunt was busy preparing fresh baking powder biscuits, and my girl cousins were frying eggs. "It's time to fetch the cows!" roared my uncle as he sat at the table and sipped his morning coffee. I inquired about my mother's whereabouts and was quickly informed that she'd departed early for the trip back to the city. I was abandoned, left behind to face my worst fear. Just like that, I found myself marooned on a farm, of all places.